You're like,
I want to compliment the committee. I never get up and said, be here at 10 o'clock. And you're all early,
cool.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
I'll save that.
We're excited about the agenda semester. Both of them.
Uh-huh. Are we on?
Yeah.
Oh, we are. Okay.
You said-
I asked you, and you didn't say we were on. All right. It's the Senate
on.
Transportation Committee. It is April Fool's Day. We have two agendas this morning, but I think one doesn't have emojis, and I think that's the one I'm going with. And we are here to talk about mileage-based user fee. We got partway through this testimony last week, and we're trying to finish up with that. And we have Patrick Murphy here. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So you spoiled the agenda item on your move to raise the gas tax.
Joke.
So anyway, there were a couple of questions that came up from last week's testimony, and I thought we could just address those first and then dive into other questions that you had from that before pulling out slides. So one of the things that came up last week, Senator White had referenced the transportation funding study and the growing needs over time. So we just wanted to make sure that the committee understood the sort of thinking behind that 10-year needs assessment, which has happened in prior agency studies. So there was a study in 2016 and earlier in 2013, looking out years, what would be the basic needs of our transportation system if we continued? And that's based on an unconstrained budget. So it's not thinking about what our actual budget is, what our ability to pay is. It's looking just purely at what the basic needs of the system are to meet performance measures within the highway section, to be able to do certain things that are statutorily required, to be able to continue at the same level of spending that we have. So adding in assumptions around the cost of inflation for this year's study, we used generally about 3%, but for construction costs, so in highways, we use 5%, given the inflationary costs that we've seen over the past couple of years. So that's just to provide a little bit more context. When you see the large numbers of in the hundreds of millions per year, that's not necessarily what our budget deficit is. That's what we're looking at in terms of needs if they were unconstrained, and then what is our ability to raise the revenue to meet that. And so it's to give a big picture sense of over time, there is a growing gap that needs to be addressed. But states do these kinds of studies all the time, and you're never sort of raising enough revenue out of the proposals that are found within those studies to actually meet those gaps. They're sort of pointing, they're directional. They're trying to figure out, where are we generally with our transportation fund and our needs, and then figuring out, what are the different options that we might have to meet those.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for explaining the funding study, because I think
then the information that I thought I understood the study is different than what you're communicating. So can I just like read a sentence of it and you
Sure.
explain it to me? So in the funding study that you all did, you say the estimated funding gap for unconstrained needs,
Mhm.
which is what you described, is projected to be approximately $317 million starting in FY 2026. This gap is expected to widen due to significantly increasing construction costs, added pressure of inflation, and operating expenses. So when I read that, it makes me think that we have a $317 million gap starting in FY 2026. And what I think I just heard you say is that's not an accurate takeaway from those words. So what is the actual, like, what is the correct takeaway I should have from that number? Is it 300 million? Is it 100 million? Is it no funding gap? Like and where would I find that information?
So it's to give an order of magnitude. It's like, what if we didn't have any restrictions around our budget? If there weren't other needs in other parts of the building and budget that also were equally valid, what would we, how would we continue our spending based on what the transportation system requires? And so there's a difference there, significant difference between, where our budget is right now and how far we can go to bridge that gap for those identified needs. But it's to give the overall sense of here's where we're going with our revenue, which is, as you've seen in other presentations, is trending downward as in terms of real purchasing power. And then, where are our costs going based on inflation, and, but just to continue to maintain the system. So it's basic needs. Yeah.
So what is the correct number I should have in my head for what the funding gap would be if it's not 317 million starting in FY 2026? Like, is there a way to project that or to think about that? And is there any information? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around the extent of the problem, and it's hard to without having the number. So what would you say is the actual amount that we should be thinking about as having for a funding gap? If it's not 317 million, like what's a more realistic number?
So I think it's difficult because it's entirely based on choices. It's based on, legislative decisions that are made that have to weigh all kinds of other variables outside of transportation. So this is to give an overall sense of where we are, but, within that, it's a decision for the legislature to figure out what can the state of Vermont actually afford.
Do you know how they came up with that 300 number?
Well, it's basically taking sort of what our capital transportation program was over the past several years and then kind of escalating it based on the assumptions of whether it's 3% for some areas or 5%.
Yes. It seems like based on your study that you included construction cost inflation, technological advancements. It seems like you incorporate a lot of those things. So I think I'm having a hard time understanding because it sounds like this is accurate to what you would need. But you're saying that the transportation budget probably wouldn't ask for that amount of money. Is that kind of the way to think about it? Or the administration wouldn't propose this budget?
That's right. So the way we introduced it in the beginning is these are not proposed budgets.
Yes.
But these are the consultant working with each unit within our agency around what prior spending has been. What are the expected needs, and not going above and beyond that.
Yeah.
But what are the expected needs over the next several years that are known? So if there's, for example, capital project in public transit that we know in 2027 there's going to be a facility upgrade, that would be incorporated into this analysis. So it's not a specific budget for each outgoing year. But it is an estimate of if we were to continue to keep pace with the level of expenditures that is expected, this is where we would be. So in 2013, we had a transportation funding study, and that found, I think it was an average of about $250 million shortfall.
Okay,
So this is common. The first practical takeaway that's listed in the report is that few states fund transportation at the sort of levels that approach or match or even exceed what they determine to be basic needs. So I think it's moving. You're looking for a specific number, and there's not a specific number because this is a sort of theoretical exercise that's meant to help inform the discussion with the legislature about then how do you bridge this gap? Because I don't think anybody's proposing something that will produce $500 million or $300 million in revenue annually. But it's to give a sense that there is a need to begin proposing different things. And so that's into that conversation is how we came to a mileage-based proposal for electric vehicles. Currently, we talked about last week about 19,000 electric vehicles. That is expected to grow. So we want to, before that becomes an even bigger problem, start addressing that. And so that sort of moved into other areas of questions from last week, where I think there was an interest in understanding, why index a mileage-based user fee if the administration is not proposing a gas tax index. The gas tax index was modeled within the transportation funding study. You can see that is something that is declining over time. And even with an index to the gas tax, the overall revenue will continue to decline over time. That has implications, referenced earlier, a study done by the University of Vermont for the mileage-based user fee and the impact of a gas tax on different populations, on people with lower incomes, on people who live in more rural areas. And that's where, a gas tax does not perform well. The folks that are driving around more inefficient vehicles, longer distances, are paying more on average for a gas tax and thus for a sort of road usage charge. And so the more that you add on to that, the more that sort of inequity continues. So
Go ahead. Keep going.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the conclusions that the UPM study came to around the mileage-based user fee, which is they actually found it to be extremely equitable comparatively to a flat fee. And one of their reasons is because of indexing. So I'm wondering if you could explain to me why a mileage-based user fee on EVs would be equitable to be indexed, but a gas tax would not.
So I think the study finds that the mileage-based user fee is more equitable because it's actually across socioeconomic backgrounds and across geographic backgrounds. The burdens are distributed more on folks with higher incomes, and so when you have a fossil fuel vehicle in a rural place traveling higher distances or longer distances, you're paying more for the gas tax. For mileage-based user fee, on average, you're paying a little bit less because it's not determined both by distance and the efficiency of your vehicle is just determined by distance. And so it's more an accurate reflection of how that vehicle is impacting the system of roads. And that's why they found that it's more of an equitable thing. So indexing a tax, whatever the tax might be, it has different impacts. So if you're building on something that is more equitable, then it will likewise follow that it's more equitable to index that tax, the mileage-based user fee.
Yeah.
If you have something that's inequitable or more inequitable, like a gas tax, and then you're on top of that indexing it, then it's sort of
Yeah.
doubling down on that inequity.
That's a great point. Yeah, because if you have a regressive starting place. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful because the conclusion that I took away from the UVM report was essentially that a mileage-based user fee is extremely equitable and it doesn't have negative impacts in the way I think we've kind of anecdotally heard from folks saying it's going to really target rural Vermonters. It's really going to hurt low-income Vermonters. And what I learned from the study was that was actually almost the exact opposite, which was a really helpful piece of information for me. But it also seemed to make the case that flat fees are bad, kind of as an equity proposition in general. And it seems like the gas tax is a flat fee. So I hear what you're saying on we shouldn't build another inequity on top of an inequitable system, but transition. So I understand what you're saying. So thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that what you've seen in slides for the transportation funding study is that, yes, indexing the gas tax will grow revenue on the margins as you go, but the overall revenue is still trending downward. So it's just actually putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Yeah. We
It's still going to continue to bleed those revenue losses as you move towards electrification, where the vehicles aren't paying any gas tax at all. So
And personally, in all of this in the back and forth, no matter what you say with backing up to the shortfall at 300 million, we're not even close to meeting our.
yes,
Not, regardless of what the number is, where you put that in or where you go with that, we aren't even close.
right.
We can't meet any of the goals within that get set by, that we all have set around how many, the condition of our pavement, of our road, the condition of our bridges, the condition of, we can't meet those goals with a 300 million or 200 million in that. The question going forward really will become, we could index the gas tax. It would be a lot of work to do all of that. Would you do that, or would you do a mileage-based fee on all vehicles? So that part of the question going forward, but the starting point is whatever we're doing, it's not enough.
Yeah, and so I think, Mr. Chair, you asked the question last week around dealing with the issue of finding a revenue source that grows over time, and then also ensuring that then isn't sort of penalizing folks that own vehicles that are more fuel efficient.
Yep.
And so the gas tax is sort of inequipped to be able to reconcile those two things. A mileage-based user fee is not necessarily in opposition to those. So there are ways to develop a mileage-based user fee over time that both account for the road usage charge of every vehicle equitably, and then have additional factors applied to it. So you can look at things other systems have looked at vehicle weight. Other systems have looked at the relative efficiencies, whether it's of battery or of fuel. So there are ways to over time develop a more complex system that accounts for all of your different goals. But I think the main point of what we're proposing is to set up a framework for the state to be able to actually move forward with something to fill the gap that we know exists now and fill in the future, and then to be able to build on that over time in ways that you all see fit.
And it will be a wider gap.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one, and I don't know if you've got full presentation or anything, I'm interrupting, but one of the pieces that has come up quite a bit around the mileage-based user fee, because I agree and I want to champion this policy, but the concern that I've heard from constituents is this idea of being tracked and having the government own or be able to look at the information related to where they're going, how far they're going, basically a concern for intrusion of government into their vehicle. And that was a point that was raised in the UVM study that I think is kind of unresolved. So I'm wondering if you could speak to why either electric vehicle drivers should be the guinea pigs for this kind of concern around privacy and invasion of privacy. And then if you could kind of explain to me how we avoid some of that and just kind of reflections on that, because we've even trying to get cameras at the work zones have scared Vermonters away. So I think that having something inside of your vehicle or the tracking of your miles would be a big cultural shift.
So that's one of the issues that we considered as part of our road users charge study.
Yeah.
And in part why we landed on a system that relies entirely on odometer reading collection that already happens now through the vehicle safety inspection process annually. So there's no in our proposal, there's no requirement to have telematics or a plug-in device, GPS tracking vehicles where they're going. We're looking purely at total number of miles between inspection periods. And you'll see in the transportation bill later, like this morning, I guess, unless that's an April Fool's. That okay.
Don't go there.
So
There could be person.
you'll see sort of how the system is sketched out, and it's based on odometer readings. So Vermonters won't be tracked where they're going. That creates other issues, but over time, as I say, we can sort of evolve the system to account for those different things like interstate travel. So if you're not able to necessarily account for people that are traveling in New York or New Hampshire, not this moment. So it won't be a perfect system when it first is put in place, but it can change over time. And it might end up that later down the road, folks that are doing a lot of out-of-state travel are electing to use some sort of device that allows them to portion the miles that have been traveled within the state of Vermont, and in that way kind of see a reduced fee. What we're also working towards with a multi-state coalition is trying to figure out how our system using the odometer reading collections could be replicated elsewhere in New England, where except for, I guess, New Hampshire, they're proposing to do away with their annual inspections. Many of the states have the annual safety inspections, so they could have that more cost-effective method of being able to collect the data needed to apply a fee. And then maybe there's a way, as there already is within sort of the freight industry, there's a way to sort of apportion revenue among a group of states according to the mileage that was traveled in each.
Have you discussed, that's really exciting to hear, because I think the only way we're going to capture out of state travel is through regional compact of sorts. One of the ideas that was floated at the National Conference of State Legislators was the use of Easy Pass to actually track mileage. We're the only state in New England, other than maybe New Hampshire again, that doesn't use Easy Pass as like a reliable. And this is the thing you go through the tolls with, like.
New Hampshire uses.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a discussion about could that technology be used to provide information about mileage. When you go through an Easy Pass, you basically, that's the thing. So you pay basically less one big payment when you get your odometer reading and more spread out. And if it's all of New England is connected to the same Easy Pass system, then you would have within that area kind of a collection or a catchment. Was that ever discussed, or is that something you could see us considering or pursuing?
I think, you know, in the beginning of this funding study, we discussed it briefly among stakeholders, and that wasn't necessarily sort of a path that anybody was eager to explore because it comes with capital
Yeah.
costs and building out the infrastructure, get all your, you know, entry or exit points. So we didn't look at that for this study.
Okay.
That might be something that down the road is part of, you know, something that's developed for a mileage-based user fee, as part of a multi-state coalition. But, you know, there are, you know, not necessarily, there are other ways to do it without sort of having the physical infrastructure at the borders. And technology exists and probably will have evolved by the time we're sort of ready for that next phase of a mileage-based user fee.
Thank you. I just want to note that many Vermonters are tracked, and they're tracked more than just the amount of miles. The manufacturers have installed software on cars, and so they are tracked in terms of where they go, in terms of how fast they drive. And I think it's important that Vermonters know that, and it might be something that we mention in this committee at a future time.
That's scary.
Yeah, and they sell your data too.
Your instance.
Yes, or anyone, but your insurance company is particularly interested in it. And so sometimes the insurance companies will change your rates based on that, and you don't even know it. So it's happening. The inspection, odometer is just so, such a better way to determine how much, you know, people have driven. And I think finding a way to adjust for out-of-state travel is a much better alternative. But I just want to say Vermonters are being tracked.
And then we need to move along.
Oh, this would be a giant transformative shift. So it's exciting in a way, but also scary. Could you speak a little bit to if you addressed like the big lump sum payment idea versus with the gas tax, every time I pay at the pump, it doesn't feel bad in that way. Like I almost don't sense it. But then if I have a reading in my odometer, I'm going to avoid my inspection if it's a bad month. You know, like if I don't have $600 or whatever, which is the total amount of a year, I'm just going to not get an inspection if I don't have the money to pay. So how do you envision that angle to it?
So one of the things that we propose is making sure that any participant in a mileage-based user fee would be able to elect their payment frequency. So it's more
Like a
akin,
quarterly payment.
yes, quarterly or monthly. So it's more akin to how people actually
When they have
pay.
to do that.
Pay. So as with any tax, there's ways to estimate what your payments might be, and then there's a reconciliation point. And in our proposed version, the reconciliation would happen at registration renewal. And so if there were an absence of inspection data because somebody tried to avoid the tax by doing that, there would just be a default higher fees.
It's very much like income taxes and picking your number and what you pay quarterly.
Right.
And they usually use your correct previous year and say, how much did you make? And then you pay an estimation. And if you're lucky, you come close to that number. If you overpay, you get a little back. If you don't, you end up paying.
Yeah, and so then there will be rules within the system about, if there is overpayment, then ideally that's just applied to the new year's. So that we're not getting into the situation of issuing lots of rebates, which costs money. So those are kind of system.
I only bring that up because I did my taxes
Yeah.
and my quarterly payments for the first time in history came in pretty close.
All right. Congratulations.
Right number dependent.
So,
Go ahead.
excuse me.
Since changing topics a little bit, am I remembering correctly that the administration did put money for the MBUP in their transportation budget?
So we have $700,000 that was set aside in this fiscal year and the prior fiscal year. So 350,000 each year. And that is to be used as state match to the federal grant. And
We did get the,
we're awarded the federal grant in
It's on
November.
hold.
Then it was paused for a review. We're hopeful that we'll hear in the next few weeks about what the next steps are there.
do you know why the House budget has the MBUP, $1 million for MBUP coming out from the general fund?
The $1 million for the was in the event that we didn't receive the federal grant, which was a possibility, to be able to begin just work on it in July. So using the 700,000 and $1 million, we'd at least come back to you all in January with significant development work having been done.
So we looked at that. So that $1 million is, it looks like it's flat out appropriated in the general fund budget.
It was a request by the House Transportation Committee to House Appropriations to ensure that something moved forward this year, regardless of whether we had.
So
funding.
the language that's in the appropriations bill around that, should that not say that this is contingent
It
upon the
should.
fact
Yeah.
that we, if we didn't get the federal grant, which is apparently not decided yet. So it should be contingent language.
Right. There should be sort of,
It might be, I haven't looked at the language part of that.
Yeah, but I saw the line
The
item
line item is just $1 million, but it could be in the,
in the
language,
language in the, yeah,
the language is not yet in the big bill.
yeah,
But there
it's the
should,
line item.
there should be.
Okay.
so we should take note but the $1 million, would that cover because you did 300,000 in state funds to match federal?
350 in 2 consecutive years. So we have 700,000.
So you have 700,000, but the total cost of this is to get to
Estimated at 3.75.
3.75.
So this would just be the 1.7 million would be for 1 year.
3.75 million to,
Is the request that we made to federal highways. That includes our state
But
match and a
But the-
$50,000.
what would be in the House budget would be the equivalent of 1.3 or 1.7.
What's in the House budget right now is just $1 million. So when we add in the 0.7, then we're sort
But
of getting close to
What
halfway.
does that have to do with your 300 and
It's only half of it. They would need to raise the rest of the 27.
Right.
So that's not in the 370 isn't in the T bill.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But, a question, okay. If we get, so there's kind of two decision points. It's, if we get the federal money, you're gonna have $1 million left over, essentially. That you are gonna, so if we get the amount that the feds want, which is gonna happen, super optimistic over here. What are you gonna do with that $1 million?
Well, I think that's to the chair's point that,
We should do it.
there should be language in there, so it's not, we have an extra $1 million sitting there for no other purpose. I think what we would propose that there's some waterfall language where if we receive the federal funding, then this goes,
We don't use the word waterfall.
Yeah. okay,
It's a bad word.
I'm learning.
We use contingent.
okay, continue.
This, okay,
But it
so
would go back to the general fund, not to transportation.
Well, yes.
That's what I should be.
Yeah, exactly.
but what if we, so, but then the other angle is, okay, we don't get the federal funds, and then you've got $1 million to like half bake something. Or like 1/3 bake something, so why would we spend that money?
No, it's not like you go to purchase an MBUF system and you need like 3.75 right off the bat. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to first design the system, then develop it out, and that gets paid out, as the work progresses. And so we would then be, if that were to happen, then we'd come back in next session and seek additional funds to be able to just continue that work.
This is all with the plan of having this in place in calendar year 26.
The current target, based on the transportation bill language, is July 1st, 2026.
So you're not-
If we're able to get federal funding and begin work, that's what we'll be working towards.
26, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the current language in session law is July 1st, 2025, and I can guarantee you won't make that.
So it gets back to the federal grant that we went after and we thought we had was 3 million.
3 million in federal funds. And then 700,000 in state funds. And then a
I'm
50,000.
just trying to,
Yeah.
I understand what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to state where we are.
Yeah.
Cause I'm trying to get in my head how the calendar will work. And if we don't get 3 million, we've got 1 million to replace the 3 out of general fund. With no money coming from the T fund. And that would be in place for next year's budget. So the 26 budget that would go from July 1st to the end of June. So if without that federal grant, there's not enough money here to do a system by July 1st of 26.
Correct. Yeah. There are some dependencies there. Where, if something were to be requested through budget adjustment next year.
Well, but that gives you
it would-
6 months, that gives
It would be
you
a tight-
less than 6 months before the budget adjustment. I've never seen a budget adjustment pass hardly before the 1st of March.
Yeah.
So that gives you 4 months to make up the ground for a $2.7 million hole.
Yeah, and there needs to be, a pretty significant lead time to be able to pass within the fast system that DMV has and to be able to build a communications plan.
And this is held up now. And so we'll say the federal holds this up till fall. Or when do we think we're gonna hear from them about the 3 million?
We hope in the next few weeks. Because there is a 90-day period of review for all the different discretionary grants. Jeremy might know the exact date, but it's sometime in early February, maybe it start. But this,
So by the end of this month, we ought to have some idea.
we should have some idea, what FHWA intends to do with what's been awarded. And we also feel like there's, a reasonable chance, that we will see that federal money because nothing within our grant was sort of against the federal administration's current priorities.
The equity allotment study.
One last question.
Go ahead.
Did you consider, instead of doing it with just EV drivers? Well, I think you did. Okay, I think you answered this question, but remind me why not all drivers? And then why not doing, which I think like Oregon did, where people volunteer for it?
So, first, why not all drivers? It's an imperfect system. We'd be moving folks from one imperfect system to another imperfect system. EV drivers don't pay anything at all. So,
$89.
yeah. The first,
I did.
few hundred have paid.
Well, I got my registration the other day and I drive an electric car. It did not have an $89 fee.
Well, we'll make sure that. So it's just, it's a more difficult thing to start transitioning all vehicles. Electric vehicles gives us a discrete number of vehicles and acts as if it were a pilot, because up until January 1st of this year, they weren't paying any sort of amount into the T fund. So that's why not all vehicles. And the second question was,
Doing like a volunteer system.
and so the volunteer system just hasn't worked well. Oregon has been doing that for like a couple of decades now, it seems like.
What's been the problem?
And what
Your
they,
goal is to do it as a pilot.
because
Learn to do it too.
if we want to be able to just implement something in a way that gets us to where we want to be more quickly. The Oregon pilots caps amounts that people pay. So there's when it's been done on a volunteer basis, they just haven't seen many volunteers. And it's usually the folks that would most benefit from participating in that system versus the gas
So if
system.
your
So
goal is
overall,
to
they're
pilot,
sort of
just to
losing.
learn to set it up and to like figure out how it works, that would be fine, because you're not doing it for that purpose. You're doing it to start it, to do it, then move it to everybody.
Yeah, so I think with electric vehicles, it has a function of being a pilot, and being able to work through different things while also raising the revenue that we need there.
So my upshot out of this is that in the T-bill, with the help of the agency, we need to really figure out by the end of this month what the plan is. Because and will there be a proposal if we find that the grant has not been approved? And we expect a proposal from the administration and the agency about how you want to proceed.
We can certainly work on some contingencies.
Because I don't think it does us any good to continue to say July 1st of 26 if we unless we can reconfigure and figure out where we're going to come up with the 3.7 when there's only $1 million for you to do $3.7 million worth of work.
I think based on what we're hearing lately, we're much more optimistic than we were in the beginning of the session
Well,
about our ability to get that.
You know, I have given up trying to figure out what's gonna come out of Washington. And for me, mostly what it is I don't want, I'll be pleasantly surprised if things turn out. But the number of levels in the general fund and here and across the board, I have no way of knowing what they're gonna do. Go ahead.
So I understand you want to take this money from the general fund. But why not? I mean, you kind of asked this question earlier, but since this would be bringing revenue into the transportation fund, why wouldn't we fund it with transportation fund dollars?
So the request is from House Transportation Committee,
So they
House
put it in.
Appropriations.
Okay. So
And
this
where
was
did they
not
get their
funded.
$1 million number? Suggest that to them. What's the million based on?
No, we didn't testify in House Appropriations. I think the
But I
million,
mean, in transportation in their request.
oh, sure. No, the request from House Transportation was for $3 million
Oh, and they-
to the House Appropriations
And
Committee.
they cut
And
it
I
to no.
believe it was House Appropriations that decided this is how much we have. Will this, be able to help you get started?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So just thinking about the historic nature of the general fund subsidizing the transportation fund, last year that happened, at least in the capital bill. Do we have historical information, even just 5 years back, about general fund subsidizing transportation fund? And perhaps it's gone the other way.
Actually, what you're talking about is JTOG. And that goes back to 1991. And that historically, the transportation fund has subsidized the general fund. It's only been in recent years that
It's the other way.
you started seeing a shift the other way.
Okay, and when you say JTOC, you mean the state police? Or
That was
that's part of it.
during the 1990s. What I would say too is the biggest crisis in the last probably 60 years, maybe longer, in finances in the state happened in 91. We cut 450 state employees. We put tiers on the income tax. And at that point in time, you were a whole bunch of our infrastructure was built right after the 1927 flood. And our bridges were about 20 years out from starting to having to replace them in big order. So there was excess capacity, or at least viewed at that time, in the T fund. So the T fund started sending money over. So the problem that they had in 91, they solved by cutting employees, putting tiers on the income tax, and having the T fund send money to the general fund. That has gone on ever since. The last piece of that was the state police, which I think we did about 10 years ago. It might be slightly more than that, but I think about 10 years ago, it got confined to the state police. But it's been a progression ever since that whole period of time, reducing over that. As the T fund has got more and more into a place where the declining revenues have made it so we can't do it.
Okay.
But that's a long history.
Yeah, it's helpful to know. Thanks.
Jason Peasley would be very proud of that.
Did I?
Yeah, that's one.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. I had that little puff of hair coming
Yeah.
through the door. She was a longtime member
Yeah.
of House Transportation.
That was her baby. Jay talk,
Yes.
did not like it.
Did not. I would say to you, that we probably have about, what would you say, 3 weeks before we have to be able to tuck in our numbers into the, general fund budget. So we have about 3 weeks. And I don't think it's fair to people to maintain that July 1st, 26th and not knowing whether the feds will say in, out, or we're gonna give you part of this or what we're gonna do. We should talk about what realistic language looks like and give them. Not, and, you know, and how do we do that to be fair?
Yeah, and so to be clear, the transportation bill language is updating session law from 2023. And instead of saying to 2025, it's pushing it out a year to 2026, but it's not the actual statutory language that we come back to you with in January that would, at that point, give us a sense of whether
Well,
the 2026
and
date is really.
I don't want to push this off.
Yeah.
But there is a piece of me that says also that, you know, the economists for the state are now saying the outlook is that we could have a recession. And I think we all expect cuts from the federal government. And if we did appropriate $1 million in general fund and we weren't able to do the same thing next year, I really don't want us to start a project and then sit there for 2 years and then I just feel uncomfortable without us thinking about what our timetable is, what we think might be realistic given the numbers and all of that. And we can't do that alone in this committee, but we are going to have a serious conversation with the agency about what is realistic. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make one point, which is I probably was the only person who openly campaigned on this topic. I started many campaign speeches with eliminating the gas tax and moving towards a mileage-based user fee. And there were handmade signs throughout Windsor County that said, "Don't vote Senator White, mileage-based user fee." Like handmade lawn signs disagreeing with this. So I do think it is more controversial than we realize just from my anecdotal experience. And I don't know if anyone else campaigned on this issue, but I openly campaigned on anti-gas tax, like get rid of it, which I thought was going to get me a lot of points, pro mileage-based user fee. And I had a lot of disagreement with that transition just as a campaign speech. So I do think it's more controversial than perhaps we recognize. And I think, to your point, if we're going to start a project that potentially will cost a significant amount of money without a clear revenue source coming to us to resolve the issues that Vermonters are experiencing now, I think it's going to be a very hard sell for us. So I just want to put that out there. I think I can show you the lawn signs. I think I'm the only one who campaigned on a mileage-based user fee because I was so jazzed about it.
I'm just a little.
Maybe they didn't know what MPA.
Maybe they did it, yeah.
I'm just a little. Well, I have to say more than a little. I'm very reluctant to put $1 million in, and then we get in a place where we can't complete the project, and we just sit there. That doesn't feel good to me.
So I just share that I think that idea of the House Transportation Committee was that this is one area where if you spend money, you can make money. And so the return on.
I don't
Yeah.
disagree with any of that, but in the push me, pull you, and us having to go to the general fund to be able to start the project and do all of this. If I can't have a realistic plan of what's the steps I need to do to get there and what's the timetable out, I think we need to spend time. with it.
Sure.
Look,
Yeah.
the chair of the House Transportation.
Is he supposed to?
Mr. Audio now, or?
It's probably a good time for, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. Unless there are other questions.
It's like 488.